I'd like to start first and foremost by telling you a little bit about myself, a bit about my career, and what's actually brought me here. But before I get into that, if you wouldn't mind submitting any questions that you have during or after my presentation. Once I'm done, I'll answer any of your questions, but please submit them in the area below. That would be great. And I'll answer as many as I can towards the end or at the end of this presentation. That'd be great, really appreciate it. Right, so I've been in comms for around about 15 years now. It's been an interesting and varied 15 years working in the comms industry. I've worked across a variety of sectors. I've worked across a variety of different businesses and worked with a number of different business leaders. So, for example, I've worked in the real estate sector with a real estate company in London. I've worked with the British Chambers of Commerce and regional chambers of commerce, again, all in comms. And up until 2018, I was in Dubai for 7 years, where I worked as a comms head for the government of Dubai, specifically focused on development of local projects and securing inward investment and promoting those local projects to those potential investors, targeting Middle Eastern, East Asian investors. Fast forward to today, I work at a social housing association in the north of England, in Yorkshire, and my remit here at the social housing association is so when I came in, there wasn't a comms team, so the remit was to build and develop a comms team, to develop and implement the communication strategy, and to also work as a comms liaison on their change program, which is happening at the moment. So it's basically how change is communicated, the feedback from that, and the output of the messages from the change program itself. So hopefully that gives you a flavor of my general background and a bit of history. I think I've been quite lucky to work with a number of different types of businesses, from government to private sector. And with that has come, and of course across in different countries and cities as well. So with that, I think I've managed to strike up a good relationship with a number of different leaders from different backgrounds. So, for example, I've worked with senior government officials, members of royal family in the Middle East, in Dubai. That the way the communications was handled there, the communications relationship between me and the senior leader there was very different to the way it is, for example, with the CEO of a Chamber of Commerce, or indeed the CEO of a social housing association. So it's very different, and hopefully through my talk, I can give you a flavor of, my tips as to how I've built those relationships. But speaking of those relationships, what's important to note here, and I'm sure some of you or all of you in your careers will have experienced this, but none of these relationships are really the same. So it's never a one shoe fits all. I think some have worked brilliantly. I've worked with some brilliantly, with some leaders brilliantly. We've collaborated very well, and they've really trusted and used comms as a real sounding board and taken on the advice and moved forward as a collaborative effort. But then, and I'm sure we've all been in this case, there's been instances in my career where the senior leader has actually been a bit distant, a bit unsure, and I've had and I'm sure we've all had this, I've had the great advice, Amit, thanks a lot, but we'll actually do it this way, we'll do it our way, so cheers, mate. But again, you learn from those experiences and you learn from working with different people. And as comms professionals, what we strive for is to build those relationships and have great working relationships across the business. And that is basically what we should always champion. So therefore, it's, I think going forward, from a comms perspective and being a comms professional going forward, I think our approach needs to be a lot more agile, a lot more adaptable in the way in which we not only work with the business, but also in the way in which we work with our senior leaders. So getting to actually why I'm here today and what I want to talk to you guys about. So when I was asked to participate, I got thinking about what I want to talk about. And the one thing that struck me was I reviewed a lot of the conferences and seminars that I've been to. And not always, but in most of them, I've left feeling quite educated. I've taken little bits here and there. I've felt feeling quite motivated, but I've always had that question as to now, how do I take the information I've gathered and move it into a practical space? How do I now implement this into my everyday life, everyday working life? And that's what got me thinking. I wanted to share practical advice that I've basically, pulled together over my 15 years in this industry. I wanted to focus on giving that advice from a perspective of how can we make communications a vital business function, give it that seat at the top table. How can we get to know our senior leaders a lot better, and how can we collaborate with them as well as with the business as a whole? So that's basically what got me thinking about my subject area, and basically wanting to offer more practical advice rather than providing any type of theoretical information. So now, over the years, I've developed my 3 golden rules, if you will, of working with senior leaders and collaborating with the business. What I've found is that these 3 rules have, what they've helped me do is they've helped me, they've helped the business, and they've helped the staff actually feel a lot more engaged, a lot more informed. And what's happened as a consequence is that I've worked better with my senior leaders. In turn, they've communicated better with staff and stakeholders. So it's one of those things where, as a communicator, I've tried to always make sure that my senior leader has his finger on the pulse of everything that's going on across the business. So that's really where I'm coming at these 3 golden rules from. So how do we actually now take what I've said and this build-up that I've put you through? How do we actually take this and help our senior leaders communicate better? And how do we demonstrate that comms is indeed an essential part of the business? It's no different to HR or finance. We are an essential part of the business. So first and foremost, I think we need to be confident. We need to be comfortable around our senior leaders and in how we engage with them. And rule number 1 for me, so rule number 1, or you can call it a step. So it could be 3 steps, it could be 3 rules, it's up to you, you can choose. But so rule number 1 for me, golden rule number 1 for me, and the most important of the 3, is to straight away start to develop and nurture your relationship with your senior leaders. Sounds easy, but what you need to understand is, how do they work? In the business environment, how do they work? How do they operate? How do they like information presented? When you're speaking to them, when you're giving them something, when you're emailing them, how do they actually like that information presented? And then once you've given them this information, how do they then communicate that? What channels do they like? What type of language do they use? Once you've got this understanding of the person and you've nurtured and developed that relationship, you then tailor your approach to that person. And as I said at the start, we need to be adaptable and agile in our approach. So for example, I'm working with a CEO at the moment, and for all intents and purposes, he's an absolutely great, empowering CEO who gives me a lot of bandwidth to do what I need to do. But I have taken the time to develop and nurture that relationship. So now when I'm with him, I know what he likes in terms of, he likes short, sharp meetings, get to the point, information presented in clusters, which then he takes away and through his style puts into his own way of presenting it and outputs it to the business. I know this about him, so I am now comfortable and confident in presenting to him, in suggesting something to him. So it's a case of getting to know the person, like I said. But on the other hand, I work with a director or a number of directors that prefer more detail-orientated information. So I need to, really delve into the details. They want to know that, every bolt or every nook and cranny of information going. And again, it's not a problem. So when I meet with them or when I send them an email, I know that this particular person is going to want X, Y, and Z. So because I've taken the time to develop my approach and develop that relationship, I know exactly what they like and dislike. So again, these things are fine, but it all boils down to getting to know the person, understanding them, understanding how they work, understanding how they digest information, receive information, and then how they output that information. And like I said, we need to take these factors in mind, be adaptable, be agile, and then work with our senior leaders a lot better. I think the best way for me to sum this up is whenever we do a course, whether that's a comms course, a marketing course, a PR course, whenever we do a course, we're always told, know your audience. When you're communicating, you need to know your audience. We put so much effort into segmenting our demographics and knowing who our external audiences are. We need to do the same inside. Get to know your audience, get to know your senior leaders, get to know your members of staff, your heads, your managers, everyone across the business. Get to know your audience. I can't stress that enough. In a nutshell then, get to know your senior leaders, understand what they like to receive, how they process it, how they digest it, and how they output it. So that's golden rule number one. And at this point, you might think, okay, Amit, that does sound great, but it does sound a bit mundane, going in, making these relationships, fostering these relationships. But what I would do is I would ask you, or you should ask yourself, well, actually, let me think open-mindedly. How well do I actually know that senior leader that I work with on a daily basis? How well do I know the senior leadership team? And then if you can answer to the questions I mentioned before about understanding how they work, etc., etc. If you can answer those questions positively, then you may have to switch off. But if you can answer even one of those questions and with a question mark, then I'd encourage you to really try to get to know how they operate, how they work. I think what we can do by that is just squeeze that extra 1 or 2% out. It's those little ones and twos that really. As 1 or 2% that really make a big difference, and it feels like a better collaborative effort. So anyway, now that we've developed that relationship and we know them and how they operate, we need to understand that the relationship moves on now into golden rule number 2, and this is all about collaborating and positioning communications within a business. So we need to collaborate and position ourselves, our comms department, our comms personnel. We need to position ourselves as a department or as a person, depending on the size of your business. We need to position ourselves as a department or a person that works across the traditional business boundaries, as a collaborator. Because what tends to happen in a typical business structure is information, knowledge, insights, whatever you want to call it, they tend to be held in silos, and it's our job as communicators, as collaborators, to position ourselves as communicators that break through those silos. I know breaking through silos is difficult because they're quite, cliquey. It's very much it's an us and them type of environment at times. But we need to be proactive with that. We need to ensure that we are proactive. We need to look at what team meetings are coming up, get invites to those team meetings. So if HR are having a meeting, turn up at the meeting. Don't turn up, but get an invite to that meeting. If finance are having a meeting, go to that meeting. Support them from a comms perspective. Sometimes what we see, they don't see because they're so close to their environment. So get into those team meetings, get invites, be visible. You can even, for example, try and break those silos by offering a general business support service where, you as a team or you as an individual offer each different part of the business, like an open surgery type of offer, and then they come to you, you go to them for advice, and you can be their sounding board. So positioning and collaborating like that is very important. We need to do that. I can't stress that enough. So now that we've positioned ourselves and we're starting to collaborate with the different aspects and the different business functions, we need to now go straight into rule number 3, which is the transfer of this information. Now, we've built that relationship in rule number 1. We've positioned ourselves in rule number 2, and we've started to collaborate with the business. So now we've got this information, we've got this knowledge. What do we do with it? Well, what we do is we use our senior leaders to start collaborating with. We use our senior leaders to start then putting this messaging out, because we are like the source of knowledge. And guess what? Our senior leaders can actually rely on us then to influence their communications, because we are collaborators across the business. There's not many business areas, there's not many business functions that actually work across the entire business. And comms is one of those. Comms should be one of those. So it's up to you to position yourselves like that, to be a collaborator across the business. So a live example for in my current role, I have positioned myself as a collaborator. I've used my own advice, and I've positioned myself as a collaborator. I've positioned the comms team as a team that actually works with a lot of the business, well, actually works with all of the business areas. So we've got a wealth of information and knowledge. So now what tends to happen is, because these relationships are built, I work quite closely with my senior leaders. And when we do our blogs internally, our CEO, for example, writes a blog. So whether he likes it or not, well, he does like it, but whether he chooses to hear from me or not, I'll drop him a quick note with a few bullet points saying, by the way, this is what the information I've picked up across the business. Feel free to include this into your blog. And then he takes that, and as I've mentioned, he actually incorporates that into the way in which he communicates through his blog. So I've positioned myself as that collaborator and as that reliable source of information and knowledge. So needless to say that, senior leaders do appreciate that extra support, that extra knowledge, and that extra advice once you've put yourself in that position. I think hearing all of these things across the business and building those relationships, positioning yourself as experts, as knowledge holders within the business is a major tick in the box for a comms team, as a comms person. I think that what we do is, when we have this information, we work with our senior leaders, we have the capacity, we have the potential as communicators to really humanize a lot of what's going on across the business. That then in turn makes what our senior leaders say more relevant when they speak to the business. So I realize I've gone on for a while, and it might be time for me to recap this. So in terms of recapping, golden rule, golden step, number one is get to know your leaders, including how they communicate, how do they like information presented, how do they then digest that information, how do they process that information, their likes, their dislikes, and then how do they output that information? What's their preferred method of putting information out there? Well, how do they want to do it? Is it a blog? Is it a vlog? Is it an email? Is it something on Yammer, for example? So work closely with them. Golden rule number two, step number two, whatever you want to call it. So golden rule in this instance, number two is position and collaborate. You need to position yourselves, break through those silos, and start collaborating with all of the different business areas. And what we then do is gain a greater understanding of what's happening across the business, across the organization. That then gives us the information and knowledge to work with our senior leaders. Number three, golden rule number three, use the knowledge to influence your comm strategy. Now, I haven't mentioned common strategy so far, but I've been building to it. This type of knowledge, this type of collaborative working can only influence your communication strategy in a positive way. You've got a lot of information of how the business is doing. Use it to influence your comm strategy. Set your objectives appropriately. Measure them appropriately. So use your information that you've gained on the ground to influence your comm strategy. And as I mentioned before, influence your senior leaders. And that then brings me on to, once we've gone through the three steps, we've gone through the three golden rules. That now brings me on to how we pull up a seat at the top table. And it's by building those relationships. Comms for me has always, or tends to be, a bit of an afterthought when it comes to some businesses. You get some businesses that are very progressive, and comms is right up there for them. But comms to me needs a seat right at the top table. With the heads, with the directors, with the CEO. You need to be in the ear of the CEO and working with them and collaborating with them. So if we have the relationships, we position ourselves, we collaborate, and then we put out informed communications through all channels, including senior leaders. In due course, the respect will come, the The appreciation for what communications can do as a business function will be there. And more importantly, you will pull up a seat at the top table. You'll be able to have more informed conversations. You'll be included in larger pieces of strategic work. And that really is where I think we should all aim and strive towards, being at that top table. So yeah, hopefully my 3 rules have helped. And hopefully you can take something practical away from this today and implement it into your daily routines. I hope that, even if you can take one sentence or one word or one golden rule or all 3 golden rules away, I would, it would be great, and I would urge you to do that if you haven't thought about any of what I've said, or if what I've said is a bit of a reminder, then great. If you've never heard anything of what I've said, then even better. But I'm sure everything I've said is just going to remind you to continue to do and continue to strive to get that seat at the top table by working with senior leaders, because I genuinely think we make a massive difference in a business. It's just up to us to position ourselves and develop those relationships, and then collaborate with the business. So I just want to say thank you for tuning in this morning. Apologies once again for the delay. It was tech. I'm just going to blame technology, because that's exactly what it was. Now I'm going to just go through any questions that you might have put forward. I'll be around for the next 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes. If you have any other questions to ask, please feel free to ask them. I'm around, like I said, for the next 5-10 minutes, and I really appreciate you tuning in. Finally, from me, I know I've spoken a lot about the 3 golden rules. So if there's anything I've mentioned today that you want to explore more, or if there's any part of my experience that I can offer advice to you from, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm tagged into all of the Twitter posts before this conference, so it's easy to get hold of me. And yeah, I look forward to having an ongoing conversation with you guys. And just want to say have a great rest of the day. You've got some great speakers lined up, and I'm sure you'll go away from the day really having learned a lot. And hopefully you can implement a lot of what we've talked about today and a lot of what I've said into your daily working routines. So once again, thank you from me, and have a lovely day.